Sometimes the people who discard you think they're throwing away nothing, until they realize they just let go of everything. Pain doesn't just break you. It forges the version of you they'll never be ready to face. Aiden Winters cast aside his struggling pregnant wife, unaware she was the heiress to a hidden fortune. Now, she's back, not for forgiveness but for justice. Ivy Sullivan never imagined her dreamy marriage would dissolve into heartbreak. She was pregnant, emotionally fragile, and clinging to the promise of forever love. But one stormy evening, Aiden threw her out into the freezing streets, shattering her world in a brutal instant. What he didn't know was that the quiet, penniless woman he rejected was in fact the sole successor to a billion-dollar legacy. With her heart in ruins and a child on the way, Ivy vowed to rise again. And when she returned, it would be to settle scores, ones no one would soon forget. To the outside world, Ivy Sullivan appeared to come from modest roots. She lived in a small apartment in downtown Seattle, worked part-time at a cozy bookstore, and took night classes at the local community college. Her soft-spoken nature and low-profile lifestyle made it easy for people to overlook her, including her husband, Aiden Winters. He never once suspected that Ivy came from anything other than humble beginnings, let alone the massive inheritance she held in secret, passed down through her late mother's side. The powerful Lancaster family owned businesses across the globe, and while Ivy's day-to-day existence seemed simple, her father, Gregory Lancaster, had always been a powerful presence in the background. A globally recognized investor, he held controlling interests in real estate, tech firms, and international conglomerates. Yet he had long been estranged from Ivy and her mother due to his obsessive pursuit of wealth and influence, a drive that drove their family apart. Ivy's mother, Eleanor Lancaster, chose to raise Ivy far from the shallowness of elite society. The two led a quiet life, free of security details and socialite banquets, making a peaceful home in Seattle while Gregory expanded his empire internationally. When Eleanor passed away 3 years earlier, Ivy was left devastated and adrift. She inherited a vast fortune, but few in her immediate circle knew. In honor of her mother's wishes for a grounded life, Ivy kept her true identity and fortune a secret. She moved cautiously, never flaunting her wealth or status. All she ever wanted was a taste of normalcy, and for a while she believed she had found it, until she met Aiden. Aiden worked in corporate sales at a mid-range car dealership in downtown Seattle. His charm was undeniable, tall, with a confident stride and a disarming smile. He had a magnetic presence, effortlessly drawing people in. He spoke with smooth assurance, a man who knew how to sell not just cars, but illusions. When Ivy walked into the dealership to purchase a used car, something she could have easily bought outright in cash, she chose instead to keep her financial reality under wraps. Aiden was instantly captivated by her quiet beauty. To him, she was unlike anyone else, modest, mysterious, and seemingly unentitled. It intrigued him. They began dating, and within 6 months were swept into a whirlwind romance that ended with a quick courthouse wedding. For a brief time, Ivy felt like she was living in a dream. She truly believed Aiden loved her for who she was, not for what she owned or might one day inherit. She laughed at his jokes, admired his ambition, and felt protected in his arms. She let her guard down in ways she never had before, believing she'd finally found someone who saw her, not her lineage. When Ivy discovered she was pregnant, Aiden appeared thrilled, vowing to be a devoted provider and hands-on father. His salary wasn't impressive, but he had big dreams, constantly talking about scaling the corporate ladder and making it big. He painted pictures of future vacations, a bigger house, private schools, promises wrapped in charm but built on nothing solid. Ivy admired his determination and never once considered revealing her true wealth. She wanted their relationship to be rooted in something real. But after they got married, the illusion began to crack. Slowly at first, then all at once. Aiden started making sarcastic remarks about Ivy not bringing in enough income. He insisted she take on extra shifts at the bookstore and griped endlessly about rent and mounting baby-related expenses. Meanwhile, he splurged on tailored suits, lavish dinners with coworkers, and pricey weekend getaways disguised as networking trips. The receipts told stories he never explained. Yet, he criticized Ivy for every minor expense, from prenatal supplements to the occasional pastry at her favorite cafe. Worse, he began withdrawing, not just emotionally, but physically, coming home late, avoiding eye contact, brushing off her concerns with patronizing comments. Tension in their cramped one-bedroom apartment thickened as her pregnancy progressed. Ivy did her best to maintain peace. She made promises, to herself and to him, that she would support his ambitions, no matter what. Meanwhile, she silently endured morning sickness, crushing fatigue, and a growing fear for what the future held. She convinced herself that everything would change once the baby arrived. That love would pull them through. She wanted to believe in him. But the man she once admired had begun to morph into a stranger with each passing day. But deep down, Ivy knew Aiden was turning into someone she didn't recognize. The breaking point came on a stormy night in her 6th month of pregnancy. Rain slammed against the windows, lightning cracked through the sky, and thunder shook their small living room. Aiden stumbled in late from a so-called business dinner, reeking of alcohol, and worse, perfume. Ivy's heart plummeted as the scent of another woman clung to his clothes. His tie was crooked, and his normally meticulous hair was a mess. "What happened to you?" Ivy asked, her hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. She stepped toward him gently, reaching out to help him with his soaked jacket. "Don't touch me," Aiden snapped, jerking his arm away. "You think you're so special just because you're pregnant? Like I owe you something now?" "Aiden, I don't understand," she said, eyes welling up with tears. "You were supposed to be meeting a client. You smell like—" "Don't start, Ivy," he slurred, jabbing a finger in her direction. "I'm not in the mood for your whining. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to be married to someone who can barely keep a basic job? Do you know how that makes me look to my colleagues?" She drew a shaky breath. "Aiden, we're partners. I'm trying my best. We're having a baby, remember? I'm trying to save money. I'm trying to support you." "Save money?" He let out a bitter, humorless laugh, swaying toward her. "What money? And now we've got a baby on the way? Great, just one more mouth to feed." Ivy had never seen him like this, so bitter, so full of rage. His cruelty hit like a punch to the chest. "Aiden," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks, "what are you saying? You wanted this baby. You told me you were happy." "Yeah, well, maybe I changed my mind," he scoffed. "What have you done for me lately, huh? I'm going nowhere, stuck in this shoebox apartment, paying all the bills, and you've never brought anything real to the table." "That's not fair," she said, summoning a flicker of courage she didn't know she had. "I've never asked for a fancy life. I've paid my share of the bills and the rent." Suddenly, Aiden stormed across the room. He grabbed her suitcase from the corner, flung open the closet, and began stuffing her clothes into it. Ivy stood frozen, horror and confusion swirling inside her. "Aiden, what are you doing?" "I'm done," he said coldly. "Get out of my life. I can't stand to look at your face anymore." "Please," she pleaded, voice cracking. "I'm pregnant. We need to talk." He zipped the suitcase shut, slammed it to the floor with a loud thud, then pointed to the door. "Take your stuff and leave. I've got enough problems. I don't need some whining, hormonal pregnant woman making it worse." Ivy's head spun. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She made one final attempt to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he shoved her roughly toward the front door, ignoring her obvious distress. Her breath hitched in disbelief. Her voice caught in her throat as she tried to plead one last time, but his eyes were cold, vacant. In a desperate bid to protect herself and her unborn child, Ivy wrapped her arms around her belly as she stumbled out of the apartment into the relentless downpour. Her suitcase came flying after her, landing hard on the wet pavement. The contents spilled slightly, scattering a pair of baby booties and a half-read parenting book into the rain. The door slammed behind her with a fury that matched the storm raging in the sky above. Drenched from head to toe, Ivy stood trembling on the stoop, tears mingling with the rain streaking down her face. It was the middle of the night, and she was betrayed, abandoned, and terrified. Lightning lit the street in erratic flashes, making the scene feel surreal, as though she were watching someone else's nightmare. She had nowhere to go, no one. Nothing. Except the life she had tried so hard to leave behind in pursuit of normalcy. Thunder growled above as she clutched her suitcase in one hand, the other protectively over her belly. Grief and fury churned inside her, but through it all, a new determination took hold. Not just survival, but fire. A silent vow burned in her chest. This would not be the end of her story. She had tried to be the quiet, supportive wife, the unassuming woman, and Aiden had thrown all of that in her face. If only he knew who she really was. If only he knew the power she held. The power she could summon with just one phone call. He thought she was weak, but weakness didn't come from kindness. It came from cruelty, and his cruelty had just cost him everything. But right now, Ivy wasn't thinking about revenge. She just needed to survive the night. Turning her back on the apartment that once held her dreams, she stepped into the storm, each raindrop pounding against her like a final punctuation mark. Each step forward felt like a tear away from her former self, a soft woman hardening in real time. One day, Aiden would regret everything he had done. Of that, she was certain. And when the time came, she'd be ready, holding the ace he never knew existed. After Aiden cast her out, Ivy found a temporary haven in a small roadside motel on the outskirts of Seattle. She paid for the room in cash, thankful she had tucked away a modest emergency fund. Her pregnancy had begun to show, but her youthful appearance still led strangers to question if she was truly about to become a mother. She avoided eye contact with the receptionist, not wanting pity, not needing it. In the stillness of the motel room, the truth of her situation settled in with suffocating clarity. She was alone, pregnant, heartbroken, but she wasn't broke, and she wasn't powerless. Early the next morning, she reached for a phone number she had rarely used, one that was reserved for moments like this. The first call went to voicemail, but just minutes later, her phone buzzed with a return call. A distinguished, slightly fragile voice answered. "Ivy, my dear, is that you?" It was the voice of Harold Easton, an older gentleman who had served as her mother's trusted attorney and confidant for decades. One of the very few people who knew Ivy's true background. "Mr. Easton," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help." He didn't ask questions. He just came. He arrived at the motel within the hour, his silver hair catching the morning sunlight, dressed in a perfectly pressed navy suit. Despite the early hour, Harold gave Ivy a solemn once-over, concern deeply etched in the lines of his aging face. "My dear," he said quietly, "I'd heard whispers that you'd married in secret. I hoped it brought you happiness, but I see now that it didn't." Ivy shook her head, fresh tears threatening to spill. "He threw me out, Mr. Easton," she said, voice cracking. He doesn't even know who I truly am. I never told him about my family, about the inheritance." Harold listened patiently, nodding as he absorbed the words. He had known Ivy since she was a little girl and had honored Eleanor's wishes to keep Ivy's legacy concealed until she was truly ready to carry it. "I'm so sorry," he said gently, his voice thick with empathy. "What do you want to do now?" Ivy hesitated. She was exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body heavy with stress. But she had to think of her baby. "I need somewhere to stay," she said at last. I think I'm finally ready to step into the life my mother left behind. No more hiding." Harold gave a solemn nod. "It's your birthright," he said. "Your mother wanted you to have freedom to choose your own path. She never wanted wealth to define you, nor did she want you trapped in the legacy's shadow. But now, you've faced the harshness of the world on your own. Maybe it's time to use what's yours." Ivy swallowed hard, the words landing deep. For so long, she had craved a quiet life, something real, away from the extravagance her father represented. But now, reality had pushed her to a crossroads. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, "I'm ready." Within hours, Harold had arranged for her to be moved discreetly into a penthouse in downtown Seattle. The property had once belonged to her mother but had remained untouched for years. It sat high above the city in a luxury high-rise, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and sleek, modern furnishings. It was lavish, far more than what Ivy had known in her modest apartment with Aiden. As she stepped into the spacious living room, her eyes scanned the sweeping views of Seattle's skyline, her breath catching. "It's too much," she whispered. Harold stepped beside her, his tone gentle. "You own this place, Ivy. You can make it as simple or grand as you'd like. But most importantly, it's a safe home. And you deserve that now, especially with the baby coming." Her hand instinctively moved to her belly. Tears welled in her eyes again, not from sadness this time, but pure, overwhelming relief. She had a roof over her head, a refuge, a place where she and her unborn child would be safe. "Thank you, Mr. Easton," she whispered. She murmured softly. Harold handed her a set of keys. "I've already had the fridge stocked. I can arrange for a housekeeper if you'd like. And remember, the Lancaster estate is extensive. There are funds we can activate whenever you're ready." Ivy nodded, recalling how her mother had always said, "Money can solve practical problems, but never matters of the heart." And right now, her heart was shattered, but her immediate needs like food, shelter, and safety were met. For the time being, that was enough. Over the next few days, Ivy tried to acclimate to her new surroundings. She began furnishing a small room as a nursery, opting for soft, neutral tones, since she didn't yet know whether she was having a boy or a girl. She felt oddly out of place browsing shops like Westcoast Coast Baby and boutique stores on Capitol Hill, places where she could easily buy anything. But that ingrained humility her mother had nurtured never left her. Once, while standing in the baby aisle, overwhelmed by rows of tiny clothes and cribs, she nearly burst into tears. The memory of Aiden's betrayal still clung to her like a shadow. Then one morning, Ivy got an unexpected visitor. When she opened the penthouse door, she found a woman standing there in a sleek blazer, notepad in hand, with a photographer in tow. "Ivy Sullivan?" the woman asked, smiling professionally. "Or should I say, Ivy Lancaster? I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but we've been trying to reach you regarding your father's latest corporate acquisition." It was Mallory Blake, a reporter from the Seattle Financial Ledger and a former acquaintance of her father, Gregory Lancaster. Clearly, word had spread that Ivy was back in the Lancaster circle. "We've also heard rumors you might be stepping into a leadership role within the Lancaster business empire. Any truth to that?" Ivy's stomach nodded. She had zero interest in speaking to the press. "I'm not giving interviews," she replied firmly but politely. And with that she shut the door, ignoring the barrage of questions that followed. Her father's business dealings had never been her concern, or so she'd always believed. But somehow, just hearing his name in connection to her life stirred unease. The idea of seeing him again, of being pulled back into his world, made her pulse quicken. Still, a quiet voice inside her told her she couldn't avoid the issue forever. That evening, Ivy faced it head-on. Face to face with Harold in the plush living room of the penthouse, Ivy took a small sip of decaf tea, mindful of the baby growing inside her. "What about my father?" she asked quietly. Harold sighed, setting his teacup down with care. I've kept him informed of your well-being, with your mother's permission. Ever since she passed, he's known you've taken residence here at the penthouse. Whether he chooses to reach out, that I cannot predict." Ivy closed her eyes, the memory of the man she once called Dad surfacing like a faded photograph. He'd made fleeting appearances during her childhood, arriving with expensive gifts on birthdays, offering hollow praise, only to disappear without warning. She never believed he truly cared for her. It was always about appearances. Eventually, Eleanor had severed the connection altogether, determined to raise Ivy far from his influence. Now, fate might be bringing them back into each other's orbit. In the following weeks, Ivy began receiving calls from unknown numbers, most of which she declined. Letters followed, formal invitations to Lancaster family functions she hadn't known existed. The Seattle social scene began buzzing with whispers. The long-estranged daughter of Gregory Lancaster had returned, pregnant, and possibly poised to step into a major role within the Lancaster dynasty. But Ivy had no interest in luxury galas or media attention. Her focus was on her unborn child and finding emotional stability. Still, thoughts of Aiden crept in at night like shadows under the door. He had discarded her, called her worthless. He didn't know what she had given up for him, how she had masked her wealth so he wouldn't feel inadequate. And now here she was, living in a penthouse surrounded by resources he couldn't even imagine. If only he knew. She filled her days with parenting books, gentle prenatal exercises, and private conversations with Harold about the future. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, Harold cleared his throat. "Ivy," he said delicately, "there's one more matter we should address, your mother's will. Now that you're residing in one of her properties, it's time to formally go over the next steps." Ivy nodded slowly, her heart fluttering. Yes, of course. Harold leaned forward. Before she passed, your mother set up a trust to be activated upon the birth of your first child. The baby will inherit a substantial portion of the Lancaster estate, enough to ensure security for generations to come. He paused, then added, There's also a provision. You are to be the child's guardian and trustee until they come of age. Your father can't contest it, Harold said firmly, not without facing serious legal consequences. Ivy felt a tightening in her chest. The weight of it, the permanence, the protection, was almost too much to process. She had never fully realized the depth of her mother's foresight. So, it's all locked in? She asked quietly. Harold gave her a reassuring smile. Yes, no one can take it away. From you or your child, you're both protected. Protected. The word didn't just echo, it anchored her. It wrapped itself around the jagged edges of everything she had been through. She had power now, a safety net. No longer a woman living on hope and broken promises. The frightened, desperate woman who once begged Aiden not to leave was gone. In her place stood a mother, steady and resolved, determined to defend her child and herself. She swore Aiden would never make her feel small again. She wasn't the poor, helpless wife he thought she was. She never had been. He just never looked close enough to see the strength simmering beneath her silence. As the weeks stretched into months, Ivy became more grounded in her new life. She prepared for her baby's arrival with quiet focus, slowly transforming the penthouse into a space of comfort and warmth. The sound of soft classical music often filled the rooms, blending with the rhythmic hum of baby monitors and the gentle rustle of delivery boxes marked organic cotton, non-toxic, premium care. Sometimes she found herself wondering about Aiden. Maybe he was still stuck in that same cramped apartment, driving that same beat-up car, still blaming her for everything. Or maybe he had already moved on to someone he deemed more glamorous. Someone with money. The irony stung. He had no idea that the woman he'd discarded was worth more than he could imagine. And even less idea that the child he'd turned his back on would inherit a fortune beyond his wildest dreams. Most nights, Ivy tried to banish the thought of revenge. She had her baby to think about. Still, in the stillness of night, when the city quieted and shadows filled the corners of her mind, she sometimes pictured it. Aiden returning one day, begging for forgiveness. And her, standing tall, unmoved. No tears, no hesitation, just truth. Maybe I won't be so quick to give it, she would think. As her 7th month of pregnancy approached, Ivy began experiencing the usual discomforts, swollen feet, back pain, restless nights. But alongside the physical strain came something else. Purpose. Possibility. She started quietly exploring philanthropic ideas, recalling her mother's belief that wealth should be used to lift others. One idea in particular stuck: a library and resource center for young mothers, combining her lifelong love of books with her growing empathy for women navigating pregnancy and parenthood alone. It felt right, like a continuation of something her mother had started, and she was now ready to carry forward. Harold supported the idea but cautioned her. You have time, he said gently. Focus on your health first. The rest will fall into place. Then, one crisp morning, Ivy was stirred from a restless sleep by the buzz of the intercom. It was the front desk downstairs. A visitor had arrived, unannounced. Her heart raced. Was it Aiden? Or, worse, her father? She shuffled to the monitor, nerves on edge. She pressed the button. Yes? She asked cautiously. It's Natalie Green, Miss Sullivan, the doorman said politely. She says she's an old friend. Ivy's face lit up. Natalie Green, of course, one of the very few people who knew fragments of Ivy's complicated past. They had spent a few high school summers together, volunteering at a neighborhood literacy program. Natalie also knew the truth about Ivy's identity, but she had never once betrayed her trust. Send her up, please. Moments later, Natalie stepped into the penthouse, eyes wide with amazement. Whoa, Ivy, she breathed, taking in the sleek, luxurious surroundings. You weren't kidding about having some serious family money. Ivy laughed, waddling over to give her a gentle hug. Trust me, if it weren't for, well, everything, I might still be in that shoebox apartment. She led Natalie into the living room. The two settled onto a plush sofa, as Natalie set a small bag of pastries on the coffee table. Figured you might be craving something sweet, she said, grinning. Ivy poured them both cups of tea. Better, she admitted, resting her hands on her growing belly. Settled at least, but definitely not over Aiden. Natalie's smile faded. She had been furious when she first heard what Aiden had done. "Have you heard from him at all?" she asked softly. "Not a word," Ivy replied, trying to mask the sting that still came with admitting it. In truth, a part of her wanted Aiden to call, to grovel, to say he regretted everything. Another part feared it would open wounds she was still trying to heal. Natalie reached across and placed a comforting hand on Ivy's arm. "You deserve so much better. And just so you know, if you need help with anything, the baby, errands, even just someone to talk to, I'm here." Touched, Ivy smiled through misty eyes. "Thank you. Actually, there is something." She took a breath. "I've been thinking about starting a small foundation, a resource center for young mothers, a place where they can find guidance, prenatal care, counseling, job support. I'd really love your input." Natalie's eyes lit up. "That's an amazing idea. I'm in. Let's start putting a plan together." After Natalie left, Ivy felt a renewed sense of energy. For the first time in weeks, she was looking forward, towards something beyond the ruins of her failed marriage. Her next prenatal appointment was already scheduled for the following week, and she decided to use the trip as an opportunity to scout potential spaces for the center. But the very next day brought an unexpected shock. There was a knock at her penthouse door, followed by a face she hadn't seen in years. Gregory Lancaster, her father. Ivy froze, heart thudding in her chest. He stood with a rigid posture, silver-streaked hair, and the confident gaze of a man used to commanding boardrooms. His tailored suit likely cost thousands, and a gold watch gleamed beneath the foyer light. "Hello, Ivy," he said, his voice calm and measured. "May I come in?" She hesitated, but then stepped aside. "Of course." Gregory entered the penthouse, his eyes scanning the space with quiet appraisal. "I see you've made yourself at home." "I have," Ivy replied, folding her arms across her chest. "Mr. Easton helped me get settled." "Harold is a good man," Gregory said as he moved toward the window. His eyes flicked toward her belly, and for the first time a faint softness crossed his otherwise sharp features. "You're carrying my grandchild." Ivy's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. A strange mix of protectiveness and uncertainty rose within her. "Yes, I am." Gregory's shoulders sagged just slightly as he took a long breath. "I know I've never been the father you needed," he said slowly. "Your mother and I, well, we had our differences, but I want you to know, whatever you need, I'm here." Ivy looked at him, emotion swirling in her chest. "And what exactly do you think I need from you, father?" He cleared his throat. "Financial support, for one. Connections. Media protection. I know you probably resent me, but I don't want you to go through this alone." Her first instinct was to reject the offer outright. She didn't need his help, especially not with her inheritance. She was perfectly capable. But Harold's words echoed in her mind. How Eleanor had always hoped that, one day, they might reconcile. And she couldn't ignore the reality. Being under the Lancaster name again could protect her child if Aiden ever came back, especially if he tried to assert rights he hadn't earned. "I appreciate the offer," she finally said. "But let's be clear, I'm not going to be your puppet. If you want to be involved in this child's life, it will be on my terms, mine and the baby's." Gregory nodded slowly. "I understand." A flicker of relief crossed his face. They spoke for nearly an hour, about her health, the baby's due date, the rumors already circulating in the press. Gregory offered to connect her with top doctors, to provide additional security if needed. Ivy, though still cautious, saw the potential value in aligning with her father, for her child's sake, if nothing else. In the weeks that followed, Gregory returned several times. He even accompanied her to a high-end maternity boutique, quietly paying for a range of items despite her half-hearted protests. It felt surreal. Walking beside the man she had avoided for so many years, now bonding over tiny onesies and swaddles. Part of her softened as she caught glimpses of genuine pride in his eyes at the thought of becoming a grandfather. Still, she kept her emotional walls intact. She couldn't forget the father who had missed every birthday. Birthdays and rarely called, but Ivy allowed for the faint possibility that people could change, or at least try. Meanwhile, Aiden remained conspicuously absent. She heard whispers through mutual acquaintances that he was now dating someone new and bragging about how he'd finally gotten rid of his dead weight. The news stung. but it also steeled her resolve. Aiden was the past. And if he ever dared try to creep back into her life, he'd meet a very different woman, one who no longer needed him. In the midst of that emotional storm, Ivy took a decisive step forward. She agreed to get more involved in Lancaster Industries, at least on a trial basis. Gregory arranged a quiet private meeting with a select group of board members from Lancaster Global Holdings. Ivy wanted to understand the inner workings of what her child would one day inherit, how the company functioned, and what philanthropic potential it held. The meeting was tense at first. Older members gave her long, skeptical glances. Some murmured about her pregnancy. But Gregory formally introduced her as his daughter and made it clear that she would have a voice in matters of influence, especially those involving charitable initiatives. Ivy earned cautious respect when she spoke up with sharp, thoughtful questions about corporate ethics, philanthropic allocation, and employee benefits. She didn't come to impress, but she did. At the end of the meeting, an older board member approached her. James Caldwell. "You speak with the same conviction your mother had," he said gently. "We all admired Eleanor. She was the soul of this company's conscience." He paused. "It's good to have you here." Ivy's eyes stung. "Thank you," she managed. "I only hope I can live up to her legacy." She walked out of that boardroom with a fresh sense of purpose. Her baby would have a strong, secure future, and Ivy would ensure that Lancaster Global didn't just profit, but gave back. She was determined to use the company's reach for good, investing in education, affordable housing, and access to healthcare. Causes her mother would have poured her heart into. Still, in the quiet corners of her penthouse, Ivy wrestled with the lingering ache Aiden had left behind. She remembered how he'd mocked her, how he shoved her into the storm without a second thought. Every day she grew stronger, but the bruise he left on her spirit hadn't faded. Perhaps it never would. She tried her best to live in the present. After all, her life had changed. She was surrounded by resources, by family, complicated as it was, and most importantly, by hope for her child's future. There were more blessings than she could count. Yet, a lingering question simmered in Ivy's mind. Would Aiden ever come looking for her? And if he did, would he be seeking her forgiveness or her fortune? That thought haunted her dreams. Again and again, she saw the moment he shoved her out into the storm. Again and again, she felt that same chill, not just in her bones, but in her soul. But she swore, if he ever came back, he wouldn't find the same naive woman waiting. A storm was forming on the horizon. Ivy could feel it, and this time she was ready to face it. Head on, armed with knowledge, with power, and with an iron will. Her vulnerability had forged a weapon sharper than bitterness: purpose. The next chapter of her life wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be a story of strength, redemption, and maybe even revenge. Weeks passed, then months. Peace returned, but it was the quiet before a new kind of storm, one she welcomed. And finally, the day arrived. Ivy went into labor late one snowy Seattle evening. Frost clung to the penthouse windows like lace. She had just finished finalizing the last few details for the Mother's Resource Center she planned to launch, when a sharp, deep pain ripped through her abdomen. A contraction, the first powerful sign that her life was about to change forever. Not just hers, but the legacy she was bringing into the world. Gregory Lancaster had insisted on hiring a private car and a full security detail to make sure she got to the hospital safely. Natalie Green, now her unofficial doula and constant support, rushed to her side the moment she got the call. Harold Easton was also there, making sure every document, every medical clearance was properly handled. Every form bore the weight of a name that now meant protection, legacy, and survival. For a brief second, Ivy felt a pang of sadness. No husband by her side, no hand to squeeze. But she shoved the thought away. She'd already grieved that absence. She didn't need it now. Aiden's absence would not taint this miracle. The vehicle that whisked her away wasn't an ambulance exactly. It was a high-end SUV outfitted with medical equipment, cruising through Seattle's quiet streets en route to a premier maternity hospital. Ivy focused on her breathing, her fear mixing with excitement. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of it all. She had never felt so vulnerable, or so invincible. She was bringing new life into the world. The labor was long and grueling. Nearly 12 hours passed. Her father paced the hallway like a caged lion, refusing to leave despite the hospital staff's polite suggestions. It was the first time Ivy saw him shaken, not by markets or mergers, but by the fragility of life. Natalie stayed at Ivy's bedside, gripping her hand, brushing sweaty strands of hair from her forehead, whispering encouragement. She whispered, "You're almost there. You're stronger than you think." And Ivy believed her. Harold hovered nearby, ensuring Ivy's privacy and comfort at every turn. Calm, steady, like a lighthouse in stormy waters. And then, with one final excruciating push, a piercing cry filled the room. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. Ivy's head dropped back onto the pillow, tears flowing freely. She heard the tiny wail as her newborn son was placed gently in her arms. His tiny, scrunched face was red from the effort of his first breaths, and he weighed just 6 pounds, 7 ounces, small but perfect. In that moment, the rest of the world disappeared. All that mattered was the tiny life in Ivy's arms. The love that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever known. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, tears of joy spilling onto his downy cheek. Outside, the sun had begun to rise over the Seattle skyline, casting streaks of gold and pink across the horizon. The next few hours blurred into a steady stream of nurses, doctors, and paperwork. Gregory eventually entered the room, moving cautiously, his normally stern expression softened by something rare: gentleness. "He's beautiful," he murmured, reaching out with a trembling hand to stroke the baby's tiny head. Ivy gave him a tired smile, her face still flushed and damp with sweat. "He needs a name," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. She'd considered naming him after her mother, or something that symbolized new beginnings. Natalie had suggested, "What about James, after your mom's dear friend, James Caldwell?" Ivy paused, considering it, then shook her head gently. "James is lovely, but it doesn't feel quite right." Harold had another idea. "Your mother always loved the name Theodore," he offered quietly. "She said it meant gift of God." Ivy's eyes widened as the name clicked in her heart. She remembered now. "Theodore," she whispered, then smiled. "Teddy?" She gazed down at her son, cradled in her arms. "Yes, Theodore Sullivan Lancaster." Gregory nodded, seemingly satisfied with the name, even if the inclusion of Sullivan, Aiden's surname, carried complicated weight. Ivy explained, "Sullivan was part of me when Teddy was conceived. I want him to know where he came from, both sides." It was a bittersweet decision. But Ivy knew it was the right one. She wouldn't pretend her past didn't exist, no matter how painful. Teddy had been born from heartbreak, but he was her hope, her beginning. For the next week, Ivy remained in a private suite at the hospital, bonding with her newborn. News outlets buzzed with headlines about Gregory Lancaster's new heir, but tight security kept the media at bay. Ivy refused all interview requests, determined to protect her son's privacy. Finally, the day arrived to bring Teddy home. She wrapped him in a soft, cream-colored blanket and carried him into the penthouse, now transformed with every modern baby gadget imaginable. A rotation of nurses and a night nanny had been arranged, courtesy of Gregory's concern and deep pockets. Ivy felt grateful and overwhelmed. She appreciated the help, but sometimes she longed for the simplicity of her old life. Before the money, before the media, before everything was filtered through the lens of wealth and legacy. Late one evening, as Teddy slept quietly in his bassinet and the Seattle skyline twinkled through the windows, Ivy heard the intercom buzz. She frowned, glancing at the clock. Nearly 11 p.m. Who could possibly be visiting now? She pressed the button. "Yes, Miss Sullivan," came the voice from the front desk. "There's a gentleman downstairs. He says he knows you. His name is Aiden Winters." Ivy's heart slammed against her ribcage. Aiden. After months of silence, he was finally here. Her thoughts spun with possibilities. Was he here to apologize, to beg for forgiveness? Or had he heard whispers of her wealth, the baby, the life she now led? She drew in a slow, steadying breath. "Send him away," she said, her voice flat and cold. A part of her wanted to face him, wanted him to see what she had built without him. But another part, the protective mother in her, didn't want any chaos near Teddy. Her son was asleep upstairs, and she refused to allow drama into his sanctuary. There was a pause. "He's making a bit of a scene," the security officer said carefully. "Mr. Winters says he won't leave unless he speaks to you." Ivy closed her eyes. She saw again that stormy night, the door slamming behind her, the suitcase hitting the ground, the cold biting her skin. She remembered the fear, the betrayal. And then came the anger. And with it, a strange sense of peace. She was no longer the broken woman he'd cast out. "Fine," she said. "Send him to the lobby-level lounge. I'll come down." Adrenaline surged through her veins as she gave the nanny instructions to keep an eye on Teddy. She slipped into a navy wool coat, trimmed with soft fur at the collar, and stepped into the private elevator. On the way down, she reminded herself, "You are in control now." If Aiden tried anything, building security was already alerted. As the elevator doors opened onto the plush, dimly lit lounge, she spotted him instantly. He was pacing near the marble fireplace, wearing a wrinkled suit and looking nothing like the man who once walked with arrogant confidence. His hair was longer now, unkempt. His eyes were sunken, restless. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step. "Ivy," he breathed. You look different." She crossed the room slowly, heels tapping against polished stone. "What do you want, Aiden?" He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "Can we talk? Somewhere more private?" She didn't flinch, her arms folded, her voice calm. "This is private enough. Say what you came to say." His gaze shifted around, taking in the elegant surroundings, the fireplace, the quiet opulence, the doorman stationed in the distance, a discreet security camera blinking in the corner. Look, I've been hearing things," Aiden said, shifting uncomfortably. "Okay, I heard you came into some money, and I heard you had the baby." The bluntness of his words stung, but Ivy didn't flinch. "Yes," she said evenly. "I had the baby, a boy, not that you bothered to ask or show up until now." Aiden winced. "I messed up, Ivy. I was in a bad place. Work was a nightmare. I was under pressure, and I acted like a jerk. I know that. I want to make it right." She arched a brow, arms still crossed. "Why now?" Her voice was cool, controlled, but inside her pulse was rising. "You threw me out during a storm when I was 6 months pregnant," she reminded him. "I begged you to stay calm, to talk, and you shoved me out. You called me worthless. And now what? You expect me to believe you've changed?" He looked genuinely remorseful, but his eyes kept wandering around the lounge, taking in the marble walls, the curated furniture, the quiet wealth. "Things were chaotic back then. I didn't know what I was doing," he said. "But I see now how wrong I was. I'm ready to be a father, to our child." Ivy's heart pounded, not with hope, but with fury. "You don't even know your son's name." He hesitated. "No, I don't. You're right. But that's why I'm here. I want to try." There was a time when those words might have broken her open, might have given her hope. But now she saw them for what they were, empty. She remembered the nights he came home drunk, the way he mocked her growing belly, the way he made her feel like nothing. Was this man really capable of change? Or was he just here because of what he'd heard about the penthouse, the Lancaster fortune? "It's too late, Aiden," she said softly but with resolve. "You abandoned me, and your child. We don't need you." His expression twisted into desperation. "Please, Ivy, let me see my son, just once. I have a right." Her eyes narrowed like a blade. "Don't talk to me about rights. You forfeited those the night you threw me out." She stepped forward, her voice quiet but cutting. "If you want to pursue this legally, be my guest. You'll find very quickly that my resources are far more extensive than you could possibly imagine." Aiden's face went pale. He took a half step back. What are you saying?" Ivy's voice was low, controlled, lethal. "I'm saying you have no idea who you're dealing with." She took another step closer. "I'm a Lancaster. My child is a Lancaster heir. If you try anything, I will bury you in lawsuits and restraining orders. You won't even get within a block of us." He swallowed hard, his false bravado faltering. I thought we could talk, try to find a way back, be a family again." Ivy almost laughed. Family? Her mind flashed with images, the loneliness, the humiliation, the nights she cried alone in the dark. The bruise he had left on her soul. "You're too late," Ivy said evenly. "I have a family now. My son, my friend Natalie, my father, and the legacy I'm building." She paused. Her voice was calm, but beneath the surface, her pulse throbbed like war drums. "You have no place in it." Across the lounge, the doorman cleared his throat discreetly, sensing the tension. Aiden glanced toward him, then back at Ivy, his expression twisting. "I won't give up," he muttered. His voice cracked, part defiance, part desperation, but Ivy saw right through it. But Ivy didn't blink. "This conversation is over," she said flatly. "If you have something else to say, send it through my lawyer." She turned, walking toward the elevator without looking back. He called after her, but she didn't stop. Every step was a choice, every inch of distance a statement. Her steps were shaky, but her spine stayed straight. Adrenaline buzzed through her body, anger, relief, and something else, victory. She had done it. She had faced the man who broke her and stood her ground, not just survived him, but risen above him. When she returned to the penthouse, Teddy was still sound asleep in his bassinet. Ivy walked over quietly and leaned down, gently brushing the soft fuzz on his head. A tear slid down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't sadness. It was purpose. She would protect him, always. Aiden Winters would never hurt them again. But monsters rarely leave peacefully. What Ivy didn't know was that Aiden's desperation would soon push him toward something darker, something that would threaten everything she'd fought to build. In the weeks that followed his unexpected visit, Ivy threw herself into motherhood and her philanthropic dream. The Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center, named in her mother's honor, was nearly ready to open in a beautifully renovated townhouse in a family-friendly Seattle neighborhood. With Natalie's help, Ivy oversaw every detail, from scheduling parenting workshops and counseling sessions to partnering with local hospitals for referrals and support. Every shelf, every crib, every bulletin board had her fingerprints on it. This wasn't charity. This was reclamation. It was a cause rooted deeply in her own experience, her struggle, her isolation, and her will to rise. Gregory remained a constant, still formal, but steady. He honored Ivy's space while offering unshakable support, financial and emotional. At the center's grand opening, he stood beside Ivy and Natalie as they cut the ceremonial ribbon. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for local media outlets. Gregory gave a brief speech praising Ivy's passion and commitment to community service. The word proud left his lips, and it startled her. For a fleeting moment, something real passed between them, a flicker of the bond she had longed for her entire life. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, and maybe for now that was enough. Yet in the shadows of her joy, a whisper of unease lingered. Aiden. Her refusal to let him see Teddy had rattled him. She had noticed more than once a figure hovering near the lobby entrance, disappearing the moment she looked twice. There were also strange phone calls, numbers she didn't recognize, silence when she answered, and the gnawing instinct in her gut, one she'd learned to trust, told her this wasn't over. And deep down, she suspected, Aiden was behind it. Ivy was certain now. He was waiting, watching, looking for the perfect moment to corner her again. Like a predator circling prey, misjudging that it had returned to find the same woman he left behind. Inside the ballroom, she mingled gracefully with CEOs, philanthropists, and public officials. Questions flowed, about the center, about her goals, about what was next. She answered each one with poise, her presence radiant beneath the glow of chandeliers. A live orchestra played a soft waltz, while servers moved between guests with flutes of champagne balanced on silver trays. It was a world she had avoided for years. But now she didn't just belong here. She owned it. But tonight, it felt like her stage, her transformation. About an hour into the gala, Ivy noticed a stir near the entrance. Her breath caught when she saw him. Aiden. He was weaving through the crowd, panic and desperation written all over his face. Somehow, he had managed to slip past the event staff, no doubt intent on making a scene. Security began to approach, but Ivy lifted a hand. She wanted this. Right here. Right now. Their eyes locked across the ballroom. Ivy stood tall, exuding grace and quiet power. Aiden, in contrast, looked unkempt, his suit wrinkled, his demeanor frantic. His desperation clung to him like sweat, staining every step he took. Guests began to whisper. Phones were discreetly raised. Cameras flashed. The tension hung heavy in the glittering air. "So this is it?" Aiden spat, stepping close until there were only a few feet between them. "Your big revenge? Humiliate me in front of half of Seattle?" Ivy's lips curved into a calm, composed smile. "No, Aiden," she said clearly, her voice echoing through the hushed space. "I'm just living my life. You're the one who showed up uninvited." He let out a humorless laugh. "Living your life? Surrounded by money and influence? All the stuff you hid from me?" "You never deserved to know," she replied coldly. "I wanted something real. A simple life. A marriage based on love. I kept my wealth a secret so you'd love me. But clearly, That wasn't enough. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes burned with the memory of being thrown into the rain. Aiden's face flushed as cameras clicked again, capturing the moment from every angle. "You're unbelievable," he muttered. Without warning, Ivy turned toward the crowd, her voice strong and unwavering. "This man," she said, "threw me out into the street when I was 6 months pregnant. He called me worthless. Now that he sees where I stand, what I've built, he wants sympathy?" A hush fell over the ballroom. A collective gasp moved through the crowd like a current. Gregory stood watching, his face unreadable. Natalie clutched her phone tightly, capturing every second on video. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. Aiden's eyes darted nervously from face to face, slowly realizing just how deeply he'd miscalculated. He wasn't facing the woman he broke, he was facing the empire he underestimated. "You're twisting the story," he mumbled. I was under pressure. Things were falling apart. Ivy took a step toward him, her eyes like fire. "You made your choice," she said. "And now I've made mine. I'm protecting my son from the man who discarded him before he was even born." Her voice cracked, not from weakness but from conviction sharpened by pain. She turned away and snapped her fingers. Security didn't hesitate. The message was clear. He didn't belong in her world anymore. Security moved in. Security stepped forward, escorting Aiden away, his protests echoing across the polished ballroom floors. "This isn't over," he barked, but no one paid him any mind. His voice, once commanding to her, now sounded like the final gasp of a man losing everything. Media cameras followed him, capturing every frame of his humiliating retreat. Ivy's heart pounded in her chest, but her expression never cracked. She stayed composed through the rest of the evening. Even as adrenaline surged through her veins, she never let her hands tremble, never let her breath hitch. Her armor held. She had proven, both to Aiden and to the world, that she was no longer the frightened, penniless wife he once abandoned. By the time the gala ended, social media was ablaze with videos and photos of the confrontation. Headlines blared, "Lancaster heiress faces off with estranged husband in ballroom showdown." Public opinion was overwhelmingly in Ivy's favor. Messages of support poured in, especially from backers of the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center. Even former skeptics who had questioned her philanthropic efforts praised her bravery and composure in calling out Aiden's past abuse. People called her a symbol of survival, of strength, of rebirth. And yet, for all the validation, Ivy still felt something hollow, deep inside. Yes, revenge had brought satisfaction, but it didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the memories of rain-soaked nights, of whispered pleas, of shattered trust. That night, she returned to the penthouse, fed Teddy his bedtime bottle, and rocked him gently to sleep. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks as she whispered to him, "You'll never have to beg for love. You'll never have to wonder if you're enough. You'll never know that kind of pain, my love. I promise." In the days that followed, Aiden all but vanished from public life. Whispers swirled. He'd lost his job, fired after the spectacle at the gala made the rounds. Gossip columns claimed the new woman he'd been seeing had left him, not wanting to be tied to a disgraced man. One article titled "From Deal Closer to Door Slammer" trended for a week. Ivy should have felt victorious, but instead, she felt empty. She had expected a finish line, but found only silence. Maybe that's the last sting of revenge, she thought. It leaves nothing behind. Still, life pressed forward. Teddy cooed and babbled, his laughter filling every corner of her world. The resource center flourished, offering care and support to dozens of mothers in need. Gregory Lancaster and Ivy grew closer, slowly bridging the emotional divide left by years of estrangement. As Ivy's charitable work began to earn national recognition, invitations poured in. Conferences, summits, keynote events. She accepted them with humility, always keeping her mission at the forefront. By the time the custody hearing date arrived, her story was back in the headlines. Lancaster heiress to face estranged husband in custody showdown. Paparazzi swarmed the courthouse steps, their shutters snapping as Ivy emerged from a sleek black SUV, dressed in a precisely tailored suit, her presence radiating calm determination. Her eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but her posture told the world everything it needed to know. She wasn't afraid. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with hushed speculation. Aiden was already seated at the defendant's table. He looked gaunt, out of place, like a man utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. His lawyer, a tired public defender, fumbled through documents with shaky hands. Across the aisle, Ivy sat with her legal team, Harold Easton, and a few discreet security personnel stood at attention as the judge entered, calling the court to order. Testimonies began. Ivy's legal team presented a strong case, complete with documented texts, witness statements, and footage supporting her claims. They outlined Aiden's history of neglect, focusing on the night he threw Ivy out while she was 6 months pregnant. Several neighbors testified, recalling the storm, the suitcase, the shouting, how Ivy had left in tears, clutching her belly. The caretaker from the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center also took the stand, testifying that Aiden had attempted to discredit the organization by spreading false rumors online, suggesting financial misconduct and mismanagement. Aiden's defense was built on emotional appeals. His lawyer argued that he had been under intense stress, emotionally unstable, but that he now wanted to be a part of his son's life. Aiden claimed that Teddy deserved a father, that Ivy was being cruel by keeping them apart. He tried to portray her as manipulative, someone who used her wealth and influence to cut him out completely. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable as he weighed the facts. But in the end, the ruling was clear. Given Aiden's erratic behavior, lack of stable employment, and the vulnerability of a child so young, the judge denied any request for unsupervised visitation. Instead, Aiden was granted the possibility of supervised visitation if he could prove consistent rehabilitation. That included attending therapy, securing employment, and providing financial support for Teddy's well-being. Ivy exited the courthouse feeling victorious. Her heart still raced from the confrontation, but her resolve was unshaken. Cameras flashed, reporters called her name. She kept her eyes forward, head held high, Teddy nestled safely in her arms. If Aiden wanted to see his son, he would have to fight for it, legally, ethically, and consistently. And Ivy doubted he had the strength or the discipline to follow through. Time would tell. Back at the penthouse, Gregory Lancaster greeted her with a rare and warm embrace. "Well done, Ivy," he said simply. She melted into the hug for a brief moment, realizing just how far she'd come, from a frightened, pregnant woman in a thunderstorm to a mother who had just secured her son's future in a courtroom filled with history. Later that evening, after putting Teddy down for a nap, Ivy stood at the massive penthouse window, watching the Seattle skyline sparkle against the night. Her mind drifted to the younger version of herself, anxious, uncertain, desperate for love. She never would have believed this was where she'd end up. Forming alliances, running a growing charitable foundation, helping shape policy at Lancaster Global Holdings. Life had taken her through fire, but it had forged something unbreakable. Natalie stopped by later that night with takeout and sparkling cider. They toasted over a quiet dinner, laughter echoing through the penthouse. "To Ivy Sullivan Lancaster," Natalie declared, lifting her glass, "the fiercest mom in the Pacific Northwest." Ivy laughed, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'll take that title," she said. Gladly. In the weeks that followed, Aiden never scheduled a single supervised visit. Word eventually reached Ivy that he had left Seattle, possibly to start fresh in another city. Maybe he had finally accepted defeat. Or maybe he was scheming something new. But if he was, she no longer lost sleep over it. But for now, Ivy had peace. She was free to pour her energy into the people who mattered most. Teddy, her father, her mission, and the small circle of friends she trusted with her heart. The chaos Aiden brought into her life had been replaced with meaning, structure, and the kind of quiet joy she once thought impossible. Her relationship with Gregory continued to evolve. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer held them hostage. They bonded over Teddy's milestones, his first attempts at crawling, his bubbling babble, the way he gripped their fingers like lifelines. Gregory even accompanied Ivy on visits to the resource center, donating supplies and quietly mentoring young fathers who showed true interest in stepping up. Sometimes, Ivy would catch a softness in his eyes when Teddy babbled, "Pa," and though they never spoke of it aloud, she saw something healing in Gregory too. For the first time, Ivy saw something in him she once thought impossible, a willingness to grow. Meanwhile, Board meetings at Lancaster Global Holdings became more welcoming to Ivy's ideas, especially those centered on employee healthcare and ethical business partnerships. James Caldwell, the longtime board member who had spoken so fondly of Eleanor, became one of her strongest allies. Under their influence, the company began channeling funds toward underserved communities, a dramatic shift from its old profit-first mentality. Still, Ivy never let the momentum dull her core values. She remembered the pain, the cold nights, the loneliness. She remembered what it felt like to be discarded, to be invisible, powerless, pregnant and pleading in the rain, and she vowed never to lose touch with that truth. She gave generously, but wisely. She didn't seek media buzz or vanity praise. She wanted impact, longevity, legacy. One crisp autumn morning, Ivy walked hand in hand with Teddy as they stepped onto the playground behind the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center. Children squealed and tumbled on colorful slides while mothers gathered nearby, some rocking babies, others sipping coffee and exchanging laughter. It wasn't just a center anymore, it was a sanctuary. Community bloomed here, rooted in support, in second chances, in love. Ivy's eyes landed on a young mother standing off to the side, nervously pushing a stroller, unsure of how to fit in. Without hesitation, Ivy approached. She smiled, introduced herself, gently led the girl toward a group of welcoming moms. It was a small gesture, but one that would ripple for years. Moments like this reminded Ivy why she had fought so hard. For her son, for herself, for every woman who had ever been cast aside. Teddy let out a squeal of joy as he waddled across the grass, chasing falling leaves. Ivy felt tears sting her eyes. She thought of Aiden for only a moment, wondering if he ever lay awake at night, regretting what he had thrown away. But the thought passed quickly. Her life, their life, was better without his shadow. There was a future to build. A future radiant with possibility. One not born of wealth, but of healing. Lit by the strength she had found in herself and the boundless, unconditional love she gave and received every day. She looked down at Teddy and whispered, "We made it, baby boy. We really did." In that quiet moment, with the autumn leaves rustling and the laughter of children echoing around the playground, Ivy knew. Her story had shifted, from tragedy to triumph. From a rain-soaked doorstep to sun-dappled grass beneath her child's feet. Ivy Sullivan Lancaster, once a frightened, cast-aside pregnant woman, had become the author of her own future. And no one, not even the man who tried to break her, could take that away. Not after everything she survived. Not after everything she rebuilt with bare hands and a bruised heart. Ivy's journey reminds us that even in our darkest hours, resilience and love can lead us toward the light. She began as a humble wife, blindsided by betrayal. But through perseverance and the unexpected inheritance of a billionaire legacy, she unearthed her power, rewrote her fate, and built something meaningful. Not for praise, not for revenge, but for the little boy whose life would begin where hers had almost ended. The mother she became, the protector, the provider, the beacon for others in pain. She is a testament to the strength we all carry inside. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories begin with being broken and choosing to rise anyway. Dear friend, life has a way of testing us, often in silence, often when we least expect it. Like Ivy, you may find yourself standing in the storm, soaked to the bone, holding on to something fragile yet fiercely precious. But as the Stoics teach us, we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. Ivy's strength wasn't born from ease. It was carved in pain, shaped in solitude, and lit by the quiet fire of refusing to give up. Let her story remind you, rock bottom isn't the end. It's the foundation where resilience is built. You are stronger than you think. And one day, you'll look back and whisper to yourself, I made it. If Ivy's story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps these stories reach the ones who need them most. Someone out there is waiting to hear this. Maybe someone like Ivy, maybe someone like you. And always remember, heartbreak is not the end, it's the beginning of something greater. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more real-life romantic dramas where hope always finds a way.